Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about digital and media production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today and all week, we are talking about what we want to spend a little more time on. So what are we actually going to cover over the next quarter or so? So we're going to be doing brainstorming. So if you've got ideas around audio, so it could be any parts of audio that you want us to put into the second hour, throw those into Makana. Let us know what those things are. Vote on the ones that are already there, and give us a sense of what that looks like. We're going to discuss that in the second hour, so stay tuned for that. And right now, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Eric Price in Kansas City, and Eric says the New York Times reported complaints of headaches in screenings of the new Avatar, blasting Cameron's choice to routinely shift between 24 and 48 frames per second in the movie. Wouldn't a single frame rate be a better viewing experience and easier on the eyes or brain?
Go ahead, Sky.
What I observed when I saw another film that was trying this experiment of faster frame rates than 24 was, because they could, it was the film Pacific Rim. And the director made a specific choice to do it all at, I think it was 48. And we've seen other films do this, but they were consistent. What I do appreciate about Cameron, though, is he will use the technique of the tool to create the effect that he wants. And that's why I really appreciate him with the 3D concepts, because it moves the story forward inside of that. But I had not read this. I'm wondering if there is a knee-jerk reaction to the stop fast, slow, ultra clean, and then the traditional speed of 24.
I haven't seen the movie yet because I'm very specific about seats that I want to sit in, and there's usually about 10 seats in a theater that I'm willing to sit in, and there's a lot of us that know where to sit, so it's been hard to get tickets for it. I may be going to see it later this week. A lot of people that I've talked to found it to be a bit disconcerting to have the frame rate changing, during the show. Some people didn't notice it at all, and some people really, if you're sensitive to frame rate, you notice it. If you're not sensitive to frame rate, you don't notice it. That seems to be and that's kind of like whether you're sensitive to motion sickness or or food. There's just it seems to be, it doesn't seem to be consistent, but there definitely are people who are bothered by it. If it was me, I'd be doing 120. so the whole way through and called a day, and people would have had a much different experience. But the problem is there's not enough theaters to support that. I know that Cameron has talked about higher frame rates, but there's only a handful of theaters that can do that frame rate right now. Go ahead, Courtney.
I'm curious to know if it's whether the capture frame rate was different between some scenes and other scenes, and whether it's being projected at different frame rates throughout the film. If the projector is actually changing frame rates dynamically, that would be unusual, I would think, and would have to be carefully set up.
From what I understand, it is all 48, and it's just that they're doubling frames on the 24s. That's my understanding of how that's working.
So the original source 24 shows up in some places where it's doubled, but yeah.
And so I think that's actually, I don't think that they could have a projector that was constantly changing. I mean, they could in digital projection theoretically do that, but it seems like from a pipeline perspective, that would be pretty painful. Go ahead. Go ahead, Courtney.
One more problem is if they're seeing it depends on whether they're seeing it in 3D stereo 3D or not. Sometimes projectionists mess up and they get the left eye and the right eye reversed. So
I read an article
left eye image in the right eye and a right eye image in the left eye. That screws up the thing.
I read an article that I guess when they were doing reviews, a lot of times they'd swap the eyes just to keep it fresh, to have it do something different than what they expected. Go, Jason.
I found myself mesmerized by, seeing all the action. I think it was The Hobbit, that the last really major release, which was 48 frames, being able to see all of that tiny little background action, I thought was spectacular. So I don't know. I notice it, but it's never bothered me. I think it's awesome. And
I don't think that necessarily that it's I don't think that we're all going to move everything to 120 frames per second. I actually think film may stay at 24 for quite some time, because it constantly tells you that it's not real. It's not real, not real, not real. In the tests that we've done so far, what we find is that live events really love frame rate. So 60 frames a second or more. Live events really like to, it feels more visceral. It feels like you're more there. Sports feel really good at high frame rates. Horror films or clips are much worse at 100. I mean, not like much more aggressive at 120 frames a second to the viewer than they were when they. But there's other things you can't do. You can't, like, at 120 frames a second, you can't move the camera very much because a lot of people will get sick really fast because their brain is no longer processing it as film. It's processing it as a window, and they get disoriented really fast. So big jib shots and helicopter shots make a lot of people pretty upset. So I mean, literally, when in the test, you'll see people look down. They have to, like, regain their state of where they are watching it. So that's a different challenge when it comes to filmmaking. So we'll see. But I think the frame rate shift, it seemed like a really odd choice, but I'm looking forward to seeing it before it leaves the theaters, just to see it for myself. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida says, for Simulus as live play out of recorded content, webinars, simulative webinars, I guess, how do you keep your audience engaged?
Go ahead, Jason.
You need to recognize that all of that time and energy and money that goes into a live production needs to be refocused on making something so compelling that you are going to keep the audience's attention, make it more succinct, and make it more interesting.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we've done in these kind of playouts is really focus a lot on chat and Q&A. So really push the audience to ask questions, to chat amongst themselves, and really try to move that forward as you're going through it, because there is an advantage if you're doing a simulive. There is an advantage, or a Premiere, or they call it a lot of different things. The reason you want to do that is you want everyone thinking about it at the same time. So how do you get that happening? And that can be polling, that can be chat, that can be Q&A. I don't really recommend doing it very much. I don't think that it's a great experience for the user because you can't respond to them. But if you're going to do it, chat and answering questions via text, so people can ask questions while they're watching and have text going on. Other things that we've done is actually commentary channels where people can, depending on what you're watching Simulive, if there's some downtime, people will actually throw stuff in. Hey, this person asked this and this person asked this. And there's places that you can kind of cut live into a Simulive. So those are a couple different things to think about. I don't think it's a great experience for the user. You really need to have something like a concert or something that's really entertaining to do a Simulive. If you're doing a webinar as a Simulive, the problem really is that as a user, the behavior that almost all users want is to be able to watch it faster or listen to it faster. If you're talking, if you have a bunch of talking heads or you have people going through slides, what they want to be able to do is watch it 1.5, 1.7, 2.0, and just move through the data. So when you do a Simulive, you're now forcing them to not have any interactivity and not be part of the show, and also not be able to speed through it. And some people want to do that. That's why they want to do Simulive, but I think it's not a great experience for the user. We don't see, when people do a lot of Simulives, we don't see a lot of returns. We're seeing the same thing with hybrids, where people will come, they'll do 2 or 3 of them, and then the drop off is pretty dramatic when it comes to attendance of the same people coming to over and over again. And we read that data as it's poor experience, or experience that becomes not important to them, and then it's almost impossible to get them back. So you have to be very careful about how you build these, because you can burn your entire audience that you built up over years in a matter of a handful of events. Go ahead, Jeff.
And to point out, you can record in some of those interactive elements. In other words, you can record in as part of the pre-recording, okay, now let's take, a poll on this question, and then of course tabulate the results live. But those kind of cues can be part of that recording. But I think Apple has almost spoiled or tainted the perception of this, because of course they've switched all their quote unquote live keynotes to pre-recorded shows, and they're much better, and also we can absorb them faster, to Alex's point.
Yeah, and the issue when Apple goes live, what's distinct is they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on that production, as much more than you would spend on a normal TV show that length. So there's an enormous amount of money that was spent. The production is much higher than any stage event that anybody can do, including Apple. The information, what you want to look at there is it's not a webinar. It's not people just talking about something. It's highly produced. There's animations. There's all these other things. So if you're going to do something that someone has to watch, it really has to have dense content density, and Apple's really good at that. Like for instance, their sessions now that for WWDC, the pre-recorded sessions, not even the keynotes, but the pre-recorded sessions are at least 5 times better than they ever were, and I've seen a lot of them on stage. On stage, you had someone who was nervous, who doesn't do this all the time, trying to work through it, having little errors, having all these other things, going very slowly. In the pre-recorded versions, it's much better, but they're not. The keynote is all at one time because that is news. There's 3 reasons to go live. 1 is news, 2 is sports, and 3 is interactivity. And if you don't have one of those 3, if you're not breaking something new that is really important, that people really think is news, you're not doing a sport or you're not doing interactivity, you probably shouldn't be going live at all. You should just post it up there. Now, the other thing to think about is people then, well, how do I get this information out? The best thing to do, in my opinion, is to put the content out first and then do Q&As and discussion sessions with your audience as the live portion. Let them watch that stuff and then actually go through it. And you'll find that I think that most people have a much better experience that way. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis. He says, has anyone tried the Stellar X3? How does it compare to the Stellar X2?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I have not tried it. I'm still on the Stellar X2. As far as feature-wise, it looks like it's pretty much the same hand-tuned condenser. One thing that's different that it shows on the website is it does have a switchable -10 dB pad and a high-pass filter, so you could roll off some of the low end, because it tends to get a little boomy on the low end if you get very close to it for the proximity effect. They said they improved the shock mount too, which is not really part of the microphone. So, the shock mount may help those X2 members out there. But and as far as the -10 dB pad, if you're using a vintage console that has input transformers on it, that can be important because some of these higher output condenser microphones can saturate the input winding on those transformers. So you need to pad it down a little bit to avoid saturation of the input transformers. But most of the, newer preamps can handle that type of output without the pad.
Next question.
Tim Buchanan in Columbus, Ohio says, when setting up for shows or facilities, I rarely hear mention of patch panels anymore. It seems people are sending signals, audio, video, straight into routers and IOs. What are the panelists' thoughts on patch panels or patch bays, and when are they needed?
Good, Marty.
Patch panels were a wonderful thing and still are, but they are a lot of work to install, and they need to be maintained pretty well because they can oxidize. You have to have your patch cord connectors cleaned quite often, and that can be a chore to do. Whereas electronic patch paneling, like routers and matrices and stuff, require very little maintenance.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Just in practice, a patch panel quadruples the number of connections. So if this gold thing is the patch panel, you're taking an unbroken connection, right, and going 1, 2, 3, 4. You're quadrupling the number of analog connections. So the number of points of failure in any analog rig, probably a headache you don't want.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Jason, there may be a punch block on the back, so it would eliminate one of those connections. But I agree with you. I think it's a mechanical failure point, having a tip ring and sleeve, whether it's normal through. The modern way to do it. And the other problem with the old analog patch panels were you needed distribution amplifiers if you wanted to multiply outputs. A router, on the other hand, can do that automatically and digitally. So all you need is an input and an output, and it can be replicated across as many places as it needs to be.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'll use patch panels for my Ethernet connections. For audio or video, it's definitely better to go the router direction.
Yeah, we use a mixture of both. So we have a bunch of routers, and then we have a lot of patch panels, mostly not so much in audio, but definitely in video. But the main thing about that is that we have a very analog. We cannot program around certain things going out. So for instance, when we use them with audio and we use them with video, we have pins. I don't use normal patch panels, so I use non-normal. So if I pull a pin out, it means nothing's going out. like it doesn't matter what you do with the mixer, doesn't matter what you do with the switcher, nothing is going to go out to the outside world. And we have these red pins. Oftentimes you just pull those out, and we know that, in an event that we've now severed ourselves from the outside world, and no one can make a mistake in that area. So that's useful. Also, it expands your router. So a lot of times, if you look at a broadcast truck, both for audio and video, they have a router that is a certain size. And then they have patch panels that basically allow them to reroute things as needed, not during a show, but you have lots and lots of options in a studio, or lots and lots of options of things that can be brought in and out. Buying routers that let you do all of that is really expensive. The patch panels are relatively inexpensive, and so it allows you to kind of, right now I have all these instruments going into this thing, but I might want to take these ones out and put something else in. And I have a router that's a certain size. And those are the things that we have to think about. Now, Dante, of course, changes a lot of this stuff for audio. But for video, we still have this issue where we want to route things and keep them. I have 40, let's say I have 40 by 40 router. I only have 40 ins and 40 outs, but I have maybe 80 things that might want to go in and 60 things that might want to go out. I don't need them all at one time, but I do need to be able to patch them into the system. So there are reasons to have these patch panels. Again, some people do have patch panels that'll pass one signal if they're left open, and then you push something in and it takes over. I don't like that, because I like it to be, I like to be able to know that I'd rather have a cable going from one to the other to tell me that there's something going there than not. Again, Mitchell, real quick.
Yeah, the automated routers also do recall, which is a lot faster than trying to repatch a analog patch bay.
It is. Again, we find that it's useful to have a mixture of both. The other thing is we can still get a show done with just the patches. If the router goes down, we can still repatch. And I've actually had a truck that had to be analog patched through the patch panel to get the show out the door, because the Harris router went down. So I have a strong respect. That's when I really learned to love patch panels, is that we were able to get signal out of the truck without the router at all. Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada says, the ATEM Mini SDI has two SDI outputs. Can one of these be an aux out, just passing one input back out while the other is program, or is one output always a multi-view?
Go ahead, Tom.
Absolutely. You can put anything into an output, any input, program, preview, multi-view, your color generators and keys. The easiest way to control this is with the Mix Effects app, or Mix Effect app by Adam Tao.
Yeah, and the SDI ones, they don't care at least I have the larger one. I have the Extreme, and it has 4 outputs, and they're completely random. Like you can put anything out that you want from those. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer, Viera, Florida, is up next. Any advice recording from with Riverside FM? I'm planning on recording a panel discussion considering the quality from mobile devices. Should I recommend mobile over desktop for the recording? Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason.
My immediate thought would be audio hijack, which is the easiest possible way to just tap this and record it.
Well, theoretically, Riverside's going to record locally on all of those devices. I haven't used it with mobile. I haven't used it for a little while. There's an issue with Riverside, and I don't know if it still exists, but there was an issue that when we first tested it, that if you weren't paying for the higher end version, you got this cropped preview, and you weren't actually seeing what it was fully recording, and that was a bummer. And so we stopped using it. We tested it and then immediately didn't want to use it. So I have not done an invent with it because of that problem. So test that to make sure that you're not getting that kind of wider aperture on your record. But it should be able to, I would say that the desktop would make me feel a lot better than recording on a mobile device. But it depends on what, and again, hopefully we'll have someone tomorrow or another day that actually does Riverside. But that's been the problem. I also think that if you're doing it right now, that makes sense. Remember that in October, Zoom basically said they're going to do the same thing. You're probably, if you're planning something that's going to happen in May or June, you may not need Riverside, for that process. Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego is up next. Steve Gibson on Security Now discussed the failure of LastPass. What do you recommend instead of LastPass? Maybe the Apple built-in password manager?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'll reiterate
I'm sorry. Yeah, you got to watch on the back end which Jeff I'm talking about. So Jeff Francis. Sorry.
That's all right. I've used 1Password for quite some time, and I'm actually switching over to the Apple built-in password manager, mainly because I'm not a fan of subscription services. But you have to be all in on the Apple ecosystem to do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I'll reiterate, it's funny that to take Steve's reporting of it, but not his advice, which I'll summarize, which is, if you understand how this stuff works and LastPass and really probably the others, and you've done the right thing, which is primarily you've used a really good, strong master password for LastPass. So far, all the evidence points to the fact that none of your information is accessible by any of the bad guys. They have all of your blob of data that they may or may not have retrieved, but it's encrypted and they don't have access to it. And if you used a good password, it'll take them years to get into it. Now, maybe a couple of years from now, they'll be able to break into it. And so any system that stores your information in the cloud, in the best case scenario, will use the same model. Apple still has they're a company that has fought subpoenas before, and who knows if that changes, and it's a little trickier. And like Jeff mentioned, you have to be all in on Apple.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Post-it notes.
It's a horrible idea.
They work great.
All right, let's tighten it up a little bit. All right, Courtney.
I haven't used a password manager in years. I write down the important passwords and hide them somewhere. But what I use on my PC is I let Google, for the browser, I let Google manage my passwords, which I create the passwords, but it manages automatically entering them, so I don't have to recall them all the time. And on my phone, I have the Samsung password manager, which is great because it can use a biometric login. It asks you to put your thumb on the fingerprint sensor to sign in to any of those websites that require authentication or a password to sign in, and it stores it. So all I have to do is stick my thumb on it. Don't have to remember anything.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I tried LastPass and didn't care for it. What I have been using is Firefox browser has a really good password manager. The file is stored encrypted on your own computer, and that browser, along with all the passwords and my bookmarks, are available on all my devices. And while the password manager only works within the browser, I do store passwords for applications in there as well. So if I need to log into an application that's not browser-based, I will go into the browser, look up the password, copy and paste it.
Yeah, for me, the big problem is that I use Chrome primarily. so that's, I'm generally a Chrome user. And so it's mostly going to Safari that would keep me out of I just don't like Safari as much. But I will say, if you're an Apple user, I'm starting to get close to switching over to Safari just to go to the Apple password manager, because in every other part of your Apple experience, it's better. Like just the password process is so good that I'm thinking about moving back to Safari as my primary browser because of that. I've used LastPass since 2010 or 11, so it's really hard for me to think about what I would have to do to extract myself from that. But I am considering it as well. But if I go to something, it'll probably be just going to the Apple ecosystem. Next question.
Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany. How do microphones create or pick up different polar patterns?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So the first thing to remember is that we're very used to video zoom lenses, and microphones do not have the kind of specificity that a zoom lens does. So you can look through a telescope and the moon will fill the entire screen. Microphones don't get that kind of selectivity, at least not yet. So the primary way they do it is by allowing sound into the back of the microphone. So a microphone diaphragm, imagine a drum head That's the thing that moves when sound hits it and it turns into electricity. If we allow sound into the back, we can control the polar pattern. If we don't allow sound into the back, it will pick up sound from all directions. So if you look on the back of your pencil condensers or microphones, there's sound ports that sound can get into the back, and that shapes that. Shotgun microphones, interference tube microphones are a little bit different because they add a long tube on the front with slots that cancels out sound from off axis, off to the side. And then there's another type that uses two diaphragms. So it basically has two drum heads back to back. And those are configured electronically to change polar pattern.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jeff. And so what happens is the design, the physical design of the microphone capsule and the body around it has chambers in the back. And so it carefully mixes in a certain percentage of sound that come from a different direction or from off axis, a different percentage of sound through the back and through the front, which creates a phase difference. If you go back a few weeks to our second hour on microphone phase, you'll see a lot of this information. And yes, some microphones have dual diaphragms that are in opposite polarity, and they mix those together in such a way that it creates a specific polar pattern, whether it be a cardioid, a subcardioid, which is wider, a line microphone, which is also a shotgun microphone, or omnidirectional, or anywhere in between. And some microphones are continuously variable. There's one that is continuously variable. It's not a video production microphone. It's more for conference rooms. But microphones like that are out there.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about is pattern when you're evaluating microphones. And, so you got omni, cardioid, supercardioid, and hypercardioid in various ways. And you'll see the phase ports on the side, and you'll know it's a directional mic, usually, because sometimes those things are cosmetic only. I've run into that on some cheaper microphones. But one thing to do when evaluating microphones that I learned a long time ago from a great mentor is he just did this. So, pick up your microphone, plug it in, talk into it, and you just talk and move around the side of the microphone. Another way to do this is actually to play pink noise through a speaker, point the microphone at it, and then gradually rotate it. I don't know if you guys did this on your microphone evaluations, but that's a great way to really understand the pickup pattern and whether that particular mic, because off-axis quality varies greatly between microphones. And a lot of it's usually associated with price, not always. There's some really good inexpensive mics that have great off-axis rejection. But anyway, that's a good way to, evaluate mics.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Andrew mentioned an important part, because using a slot-based or port-based to change the polar pattern is not the same at all frequencies. So sometimes high frequencies can be more narrow in the polar pattern, but as you go down, and lower frequencies can be more omnidirectional. So if you look at the polar pattern here, let's see, of a 416 here, you can see the high frequency is the little squiggly line here, and these are the lower frequencies as you go around the outside edge. And so much lower frequencies over here are much broader, so you can it gets colored as the sound becomes colored. It changes frequency as you move off axis. So that's a consideration. So always look at the polar pattern plot of that microphone to see how smooth it'll be. If you're not dead on center, if you go off slightly, you might hear the high frequencies drop off first, but the sound level will be the same.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Andy Korkendorfer in VR, Florida again. Is it okay to run Zoom ISO on Mac OS Ventura? Are there any reported issues? Thanks.
No reported issues. It's working just fine. Yeah, so you shouldn't have any problem with it on Ventura. Next question.
Jesse Kester in Glendale. And he says, we plugged our two SM7Bs into our Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4Ks and found ourselves listening to an enthusiastic Spanish news broadcast. Any words of wisdom on what's going on? Moreover, how can we fix it?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, this is known as rectification, which happens if you're in the field of a very strong, usually an AM radio station will be more than an FM radio station, will cause this interference. And anything that has an amplifier in it can rectify that, basically tune that RF signal and feed it into your audio amplifier. And it comes into the usually a preamp. It'll come in over a wire, the microphone wire, or you're dealing with dynamic mics. Those are nice little coils in there, which make great little pickups for AM radio signals, and feed it into your preamp where it's rectified and tuned. So Faraday cage is use good cables. It can also come in over the microphone cables. So use Canary Star Quad, which tends to suppress more external RF coming in. Other than that, build a Faraday cage around your studio if you're next to a transmitter site.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, the first thing I would look at is the wiring you're using between the microphone and the mixer. You want to make sure that the wire is grounded to the shell at both ends, or at least to pin 1 on both ends, and that it has a high percentage of shielding. So some less expensive wire has braided shielding with, say, if you look at the specs, it'll say a percentage of coverage. So you want to look for something that has at least 90% shielding coverage, or foil. Foil would be 100%, like the Belden wires. Yes, and Star Quad would be a layer of protection above shielding, because the two pairs of wires are opposite each other, and they will help cancel things out even more. If you're still getting a problem, then I would look at the input to the Blackmagic device. There may be an issue there with shielding of the cabinet, which has been a problem. The radio can get into the unit rather than through the wire, through the connector, and directly through the cabinet into the preamp. So those are some things to look at.
Go, Jason.
First things first, disconnect the power from the camera, let it run on battery, and make sure that that's not making it worse. Next, get the preamp, and the way that I read this question, there was no mixer in the middle. The camera was the mixer, and yes, that camera actually can power an SM7B. I'll remind you that getting the preamp is as close to the mic as possible, and trying to make it digital is probably the best way to go. Even Dante might be an option, but yeah, it's going to be a tough one. Star Quad cable, 100%.
Yeah, you might want to think about, how if I was going to do something regularly, wherever that is, I would definitely think about something like an MM1 that is really, really close to a sound device's MM1 that's really, really close to the mic, and then just plug it right into, get it into Dante as fast as it can. It's just a big antenna. I used to DJ weddings a long time ago at Lookout Mountain in Colorado, and there's a big radio tower that's right behind the event center. It's probably not healthy to be up there all the time. I'm glad I didn't have to work too often there, because literally I just picked up stations when I turned it on. And how I took it is I went through a whole roll of aluminum foil every show that I did there, because I would wrap my entire the back of my kit with aluminum foil, wrap the cables that went to it. The only thing that wasn't wrapped is what went out to the speakers that people could see, and that seemed to work okay. But it was otherwise I'd pick up multiple stations depending on how I move the wire. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex just mentioned something I was going to suggest, because that Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera may have a plastic case on it, so it may not be very well shielded from the outside. So if you get a mixer, make sure it's in a metal case so that's grounded, or cover it with tinfoil, as Alex did.
Try tinfoil. See what it worked. Come back and tell us if the tinfoil worked. Talk about tinfoil hats. I put a tinfoil hat
Be sure
on
to put some on your head, too, just for fun.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
And when you're saying wrap it in tinfoil, you mean just treat it like a baked potato, the cables?
Like a baked potato. Just try it. Wrap the camera first, then wrap the cable, and just see what happens. Does that work? And then that'll tell you, it'll at least tell you what's happening to start with. So then come back tomorrow and let us know. All right, or whenever after you've done it. Next question.
And bring pictures. Guy Cochran's up next from Seattle, Washington. He says, any consumer electronics show and news that's happening in Vegas right now?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, this is what we call a long-distance Cochrane. We were talking to him last night on After Hours, and he mentioned two big shows they're going on, or special announcements. Panasonic and Sony both are announcing something. We don't know anything about it, but in general, he has asked us to Discord him if any targeted items we'd like looked at, like, for example, Live 360 with an HDMI connector. Any of those things, he'll report back at some point.
That sounds great. One of the big things that I saw in the news was that Sony is actually not doing their announcement at CES. They're doing it as a live stream today. I think it's at like 5 o'clock Eastern Standard. So they're going to do the announcement. That's the kind of thing that makes conferences, the people who develop the conferences, it makes them stay up at night. When Sony says, I don't need to be there to do the announcement, I can do a video instead and do a press conference without. So we want to watch that, but that's a very scary trend for CES, for a company that it's a lot of smaller companies have been doing that. But Sony doing it is a pretty big deal. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. Recommendations for an Omni mic hung above a kitchen-sized table out of the shot for dialogue capture for people sitting around it having a conversation, or perhaps a few smaller Omni plant mics hidden on the table. He wonders which of those approaches might be best. His budget is around $200 US.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, hanging's great if you can get it fairly close, if it's a fairly tight shot. And you can get it out in front of the people. Make sure you don't hang it directly above their heads, because that's out of the sound pattern of most speech. And for that price, you're going to have a problem. Maybe the Behringer Bigfoot or the Yeti, Blue Yeti, within their bipolar pickup pattern might work for two people on either sides of the table. A couple of those configured either on the table or hanging above, as long as they're within about 2 or 3 feet from each of the people on either side of the table, might work for you in that price range.
Go, Jeff.
I'm going to tell you about a little company on the Carolina coast, North Carolina. And it's called Nayant, and I'll put a link in there. And he hand builds microphones from tiny omnidirectional capsules and wires them for either wireless packs or direct for plug-in power. But he also makes an XLR version, so you can get an Omni with an extended lead to an XLR for $59. And they sound surprisingly decent because all the smarts is in the capsule, and he just buys Panasonic capsules that are pretty decent.
Go ahead, Marty.
I would have a concern about using an omnidirectional microphone in that situation, because it's going to pick up every little sound and every little creak and every little foot movement in the studio. I would, if you have people 360 degrees around the table, well, I would maybe use a figure 8 microphone, or maybe 2 figure 8 microphones. Unless you're using something like Noise Assist or some other noise reduction processing, it's just going to not sound very present. It's going to sound very open and dull. So I would rethink that strategy.
Next question.
Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York says, morning, guys. I know it depends on your voice, but when would you recommend the Electro Voice RE20 over the Electro Voice RE27? Looking at two talents here, a male voice that is mid-low in range and a female, which is mid-high. Thanks.
Good. Mitchell?
I partnered up with RE20s way back in the 70s at major radio stations. A great microphone for a male voice. It's got great off-channel rejection. Not off-channel, you can move around it a lot. No proximity problems. And the RE27 came along later, more powerful magnet, a neodymium microphone, probably a little bit better high-frequency response, so you could use that with the female voice.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll take an extreme stance here. I'm racking my brain, and I can think of no scenario where you'd want to use an RE20 versus an RE27 based on your constraints.
Interesting, because I thought you were going to go the other direction. Go ahead, Jeff.
Then I have to chime in. I mean, it really does depend on what your application is. Is it live? I mean, the RE20 is going to be, theoretically that flatter, more neutral sound, which lets you, based on equipment and or post-processing, EQ to get it where you want, but, potentially more flexible, especially since you're talking about, you definitely have a male voice and a female voice. They're going to be different. And like Mitch pointed out, the RE27 is probably, leans to the brighter side of the spectrum.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, the 27 has a wider frequency response, so better high end. It has a stronger output level by a full volt. And it has filter switches for tailoring the frequency response of the microphone. So it might be a more flexible option all around.
Rental on those mics is pretty low. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's probably like $50 a day. I would rent 2 of each, and then I would just stick them in there and try to figure it out. And then once you've done it once, then you know which one works better for each voice. But if when in doubt, just just start spreading it down the field. But a lot of times we rent when we have people we haven't worked with in the past. We'll rent 2 or 3 different mics for each, like for each person. And we're just going to kind of go in there and figure it all out. If you can afford to do that, I wouldn't buy the mics. I just rent them. They're a lot, again, they're not, I don't know what the number is, but they're probably less than $50 a day to rent them. And you only need to do it once, because once you figure it out, you know. So that's what you want to kind of think about if you haven't worked with someone before. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. Anyone else having issues with YouTube stalling and wheel spinning on the M1 Mac Studio? The only way to recover is to quit and restart Chrome. A pop-up came up one time, and it was basically Google blaming the ISP. I have a 500 by 500 fiber connection. What's going on?
Go ahead, Serge.
There's multiple points in that question. I'm going to concentrate on the 500 speed of the internet connection. By the way, it's depending of your ISP and depending of how you are connected internally with your LAN. Is it Wi-Fi? Is it LAN, Ethernet? And by the way, also when you do a speed test, be sure to test with the single connection at the bottom of the speed test right here, because multi-thread connection will maximize your connection, but a single thread will show you the speed that ISP will give you on a single connection to Google.
You go, Jeff.
Yeah, one of the keywords that stood out is on Chrome, and so you would think, hey, that's made by Google. Google makes YouTube, but you're on a Mac. So, to Alex's quandary, which one to go back to, nothing is going to beat Safari in terms of performance and integration with the OS on a Mac, and it's going to be very efficient. Now, sometimes to your detriment, it may pause things you don't want it to, but, I would at least as an experiment try running it on Safari for a while and see if you get those same problems. If you do, now you're maybe pointing to some other factor like speed or latency or anything like that. But and especially look at if something changed, has that always happened on that machine? But I would at least try Safari for a couple of days, see what happens.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I've noticed this recently, and I don't have an M1 Mac, but I've been watching YouTube recently during the holidays on Fire Stick or Roku or other streaming devices. I've seen this problem pop up many times, and I think what's happening is I look at what I'm looking at, and a lot of bloggers and YouTube streamers are now streaming in 4K 60, which is a lot of bandwidth, and I think YouTube is choking. If a lot of people are watching that particular stream at 4K 60, I switch down to 1080p and it can handle it, and I find that stream less congested, and it doesn't buffer or stop or freeze. But, YouTube has lots of bandwidth, and they can throw lots of bandwidth at it. But, maybe their management during the holidays, so many people are hitting it that it just becomes overwhelmed.
It might be. I will find that a lot of computers can't handle 4K. So they just start getting all chunky when they do it. So a lot of computers can't sort that out. So it's probably not YouTube's bandwidth management, but it is probably a 4K solution there. I have seen this recently, and I don't know why. Next question.
Greg Gibson in Washington, D.C. is up next watching a Shark Tank rerun. I saw a pitch from Wedfully, a company that remotely live streams weddings using phones, tablets, and or laptops. They got $200,000 from Robert for a 10% equity investment. Curious if the panel has heard of this company or has any thoughts about it.
Code Sky.
I do have thoughts. I went to the website. It's a very efficient website. And I'm thinking if I were creating a wedding situation, I would want, again, what's it cost? And I don't really care about the equipment. Do you provide a good service? And so what it looks like on the website, yes, it is a production company specializing in weddings. And there's money to be made there. A lot of people have started their careers there and continue to make a good living. What I was impressed with was they do have a base rate that they start, and then they'll do the add-on things. But consistently, they do say they have professional crew. And so that whatever equipment they do bring in, they do have different levels. They have humans that are trained and know how to make that happen. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing both in person or remote or a hybrid, you want the tool to work to the audience wherever they are. And so if they've got people that are doing that, seems like a good service.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't want my wedding day to be shot with a phone. like I wouldn't pay someone to do that, I guess is what I would say. So that's I think it's a hard sell. I think that oftentimes I see Shark Tank when they invest in things that I know, I go, well, they didn't know what they were doing. That's someone who knows about money, doesn't know about the industry that they're actually investing in, which is kind of common for some venture folks. So it feels like as a guess, I'd be surprised if this actually works very well, because you don't need to do as a phone anymore. There's plenty of professional cameras at $2,000. It just doesn't make as much sense. Next question.
Alexander Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia, using DaVinci Resolve to cut clips for social media. One timeline is for 60-second YouTube Shorts and another is for TikTok. All clips are arranged on one track. Is there a way to tell how long a clip is after selecting it?
I don't think so. I think I would just be looking at it on the timeline, but I don't know of any way that it's going to show you what that is. But I'd look at it. What I tend to do is just go from one side of the clip to the other, and just if it's not in the start and finish, I just do the math in my head really quickly to figure out roughly what it is. I'm curious why you're doing a different one for YouTube Shorts and TikTok, even given that they're the same format. So I'd be really curious what next time you're on the panel, I'd love to know what the decision process is there. Next question.
Ronnie Hotsey in Tromsø, Norway says, how much ambient sound should in-ears for multi-hour Zoom meetings be blocking out? Everything or less? Is the panel using custom molded in-ears or off-the-shelf products?
Good, Marty.
I'm using an off-the-shelf product. And for this application in this environment, I'm not really concerned about blocking out ambient sound because it's a fairly quiet, relatively quiet environment. But if I were a musician on stage, if I were an announcer at a stadium where the ambient noise is really loud, then I would want to choose my in-ears for the reason of blocking out ambient sound. And so, in this application, being able to hear some things around me directly through my ears is fine.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm with Marty. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm new to inner ear monitors on office hours. These headphones like any other radio DJ. And my Shure 215s block out most, not all. And Mickey had suggested I get these Comply foam inserts. And they do an even better job of getting a better seal around them, even though you see that I don't have them all the way in. But it's a good balance of being able to hear stuff going on around me and being able to hear perfectly what's going on in office hours.
Go, Jason.
This is like asking, do you want closed or open back headphones? Sure, there are really good reasons to use each in specific scenarios. These are the Shure 840 or SE 846s. I think they block natively, depending on the tip, at 37 decibels, and that's way more than you need for something like this. But really, it's just to taste.
Good, Bill.
And I want as much open room as I can in the smallest thing. So I use these little security headphone things, and they're just very, very, very tiny. They just loosely fit in the ear. I can still hear voices perfectly. I wouldn't use them for music.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. Mixing audio for a live web broadcast remotely is proven. Is it possible to mix the venue for a live performance via remote?
Go ahead, Andy. Can't hear you.
Yes, no, and maybe is the answer to that one. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. If it's the only way I can think of it that you would be successful if you did it remotely would be for a corporate event, like a breakout room, for example, is usually a low maintenance kind of thing. And a lot of times those are unmanned or womaned in terms of their audio systems, and someone's walking around, and you could probably mix that remotely. But the problem is you don't have ears in the room. Right. You need someone with ears in the room. You need to put yourself in the place of the audience. That's what an audio engineer does. They sit there and they listen, and the good ones will, evaluate on in real time, what is the audience experience. For music, no, although I've seen it tried and it's failed. And that is because the decisions that you need to make in real time with musicians on stage for their needs and the audience happen very quickly. And you also have to anticipate things. That's really hard to do when you're not in the room.
Marty?
Is it possible? Yes. Is it a good idea? As Andy said, under very limited situations. I can't tell you how many churches and even university theaters I've been in where the mixing board is in a booth behind a plate glass window with a pair of speakers, tiny little speakers set up in there for to listen to. Or maybe there's a hole about this big in the wall in front of you for you to listen through. And, that's just a lens that changes everything. And you just can't hear what you're doing. You can't hear what the audience is doing. If you're only adjusting levels and don't need to be worrying about EQ and dynamics, for speech only, it may be possible.
I think in general, I would agree that you want to be in the room. I think that I would rather have a highly skilled mixing engineer remotely than a low-skilled mixing engineer in the room. So I think that's kind of the trade-off there. Next question.
Eric Price in Kansas City says, interesting results reported on DeepMind taking on medical questions. Could Google be moving closer to making their own AI tech more widely accessible, given OpenAI's and others' reception?
Go ahead, Courtney.
They could. However, medical questions a little bit different than other, asking DeepMind to, judge your choice of partner or whatever, because it could be a life or death situation if you base your if you base your actions based on the results of a medical question. But think about it. It's like, AI answering a medical question is like having 100,000 doctors consult and then come up with a consensus. And many times doctors come up with different consensus, so it has to do a weighting of which one is better, et cetera. So diagnosis is a pretty good response. Whether they'll do it or not depends on the legal disclaimers that they have to make and that you have to sign before you take any medical advice. There's a lot of lawyers involved in that.
Google and others, Microsoft and others, have been really staying back because they're afraid they'll scare everybody. They can do at least what OpenAI can do. They've been working on it for a very long time. They just don't turn it on because they're afraid that people won't use their other services because they're afraid that these services are being activated. So they're letting the current smaller companies take a lot of the heat right now, but they'll follow up once things start to settle down. Next question.
Craig Gibson in Washington, D.C. Did anyone see Monday Night Football? A player suffered cardiac arrest and was given CPR on the field, including the use of a defibrillator. Curious how everyone thought ESPN handled the tragic situation.
I actually thought they did a pretty good job. I watched it. I was watching live when that happened, and I thought that they did a pretty good job of, no one's ever seen this before. So they're making stuff up. They had to run people. They obviously had to run people into a studio to start talking. They had to, figure out what to do, deal with a situation that was unknown. So I would say that they did a pretty good job. As someone who's worked in a lot of events like that, and when you have something like that happen, you're now all just kind of trying to put a backup in to make that work. And I think that it was good that they didn't show the hit over and over and over again. It's good that they that they once they realized how serious it was, and I think that they just gave us the information that they had as they had it. Bill, real quick.
I would agree with that assessment. I noticed that they were trying to do a little PR spinning in the later part of it, but they got the most important thing right, which is pay attention to the human being that is obviously hurt and try to help everybody feel at least as knowledgeable as they can about the fact that we don't know what's going on. Hard gig.
And people will complain a lot about the number of commercials. Commercials give you a time to think. So you run the commercials. It does mean that they got a lot of their guaranteed commercials out of the way because they didn't know if the show was going to keep going. So that helps them. But the big thing is that when you get a commercial, it lets everybody go, okay, now what are we going to do here, rather than trying to figure it out while you're running live. So I think that they were trying to take lots of breaths as they figured out what was going on. Next question.
Henry Ramos, Yonkers, New York. What's the Sony Sphere satellite project? Something about users being able to take photos from space. I noticed it was part of yesterday's SpaceX launch.
I don't know, but that sounds amazing. So we'll have to do more research on it. The Sony Sphere satellite project. Okay, yeah. Well, it's photogrammetry from all those little satellites would be a lot of fun. I had a friend one time doing photogrammetry. He asked, "Can you do photogrammetry from a 70,000 millimeter lens?" He was like, "No, who has that?" Never mind. So it'd be fun to do. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. I remember seeing Cheap Trick, and the front of house engineer had the input for the guitar synth, even though there was no keyboard player on stage. How well do those units work? I've heard they can be glitchy depending on how you play.
Marty, real quick.
Well, I remember seeing Carl Palmer's ELP experience, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and there were no keyboards on stage. All of the Keith Emerson's synthesizer parts were played by a guitar and sounded great.
Good. Andy?
Oh, I'll just say that with modern technology, the tracking, and that's what he's referring to, is how well the guitar you're playing is being tracked. And it used to be done, I believe, with analog pickups that were converted, and now they have other pickups that do this much better, and they're designed for guitar synth, for MIDI especially. And so that problem is, I think, much less so these days.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana says, should a mixer walk around the room to hear how it sounds outside of the booth?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Absolutely, yes. And that's the great thing of having a tablet remote control, is you can keep adjusting the mix as you're wandering around the room, especially if the booth is enclosed in some way. It is not the same acoustic environment as the audience has.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, I was doing an event with a band on stage. Actually, the band was over in one side. They were more like a pit band. And this was during rehearsals, and the bass was just blasting me out as I was sitting at the mixer. So I asked the bass player to turn it down. He said, if I turn this down anymore, I'm not going to be able to hear it. And then I walked around the room, and the bass was very light. So where the mixer was in a location in the room where all the bass was building up artificially, so it sounded strong to me. And not only did it sound funny, but it really changed the way I had to think about my mix. So yes, absolutely. Get up and walk around the room, both before the audience comes in and during the show, because all those bodies will change the way the room sounds.
You go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think Marty is spot on, because not all rooms are created equal. Some are different than others. And if you don't understand the characteristics, like he said, bass may build up in certain areas and cause problems for the mix. You may have to find a medium area that makes sense. But the best instrument you have are your ears. Use your ears. Best thing you got.
Go, Jesse.
A really fun way to test this in the micro is to play a single tone signal out of your stereo speakers at home, cover one ear, and kind of move around a little bit, and you will hear where those two signals phase and drop out. And even in that very simple test, you can see the importance of moving around.
Yeah, and this is where it's a really good argument for why you want opening acts, why you want pre-shows, why you want all these things that use your system, is so that you can see what's happening once all the people are in. I think there was a good point earlier about once a lot of people come in, what we sometimes refer to as water bags. Once you have a lot of water bags in there, you don't know what, it's going to be a lot different than what it was before. And so it really persuading a client to go into a pre-show and to have something there really helps a lot to make that better, so that you can tune things on the stuff that's less important and then be ready for the stuff that is. Next question.
Mark Giuliani in Washington, D.C. We're going to start video streaming a radio show called Tipping the Scales of Justice. The host will be in the Air studio. The guests will come in over Zoom. Is Unity Intercom a good tool for comms, and what hardware do I need to get started?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I would recommend for a broadcast environment, particularly since you may use it for other things other than just your live TV show, take a look at the new Telos IP-based intercom system.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what kind of money you have. So the Telos will be a little bit more expensive than Unity, but less expensive than ClearComm. So you just have to decide. What's nice about the Telos is that it has hardware. We're going to bring those guys in and have them talk to us this spring. But all you need is a Mac Mini to act as a server. You could do there's a cloud version of Unity that you could theoretically use, but what we do is use a Mac Mini to administer that. And you might only need a handful of licenses, and then you just buy those licenses up. But the Mac Mini is really the only piece of hardware that you need to get started. And then people are going to be installing it. You just have to decide how many licenses you want. Last question for the first hour.
Michael, or maybe Michelle Petria, I can't really tell. Poland. I use Reaper and NDI for a live mixing audio web broadcast, which is almost always interview or debate. Anyone try it? Do you know any alternatives to it with only sound cards, Focusrite he mentions, and PC Windows, or how to my live mixer, which is a DAW, digital audio workstation?
Go ahead, Jeff.
The first software mixer that comes to mind is the Harrison Mixbus software, which is around the same price as Reaper.
Yeah, I think that I would probably take a look at Mixbus. It would be the first thing that I would look at. It's great. All right, we've got a lot of brainstorming. There's a lot of questions or a lot of comments that are there. If you're one of the panelists, so we're going to be talking about brainstorming for audio and what do we want to cover over the next quarter, over the next year, those types of things. And so if you are a panelist and you have a couple things you want to say before we jump into the comments from the producers, go ahead and raise your hand right now. Really this is a wide range. We're covering audio in everything from recording to post to effects to processing to the tools that we want to use. Those are all the things that are fair game. Also think about what people you'd like to bring in that we might be able to reach out to and say, okay, it'd be really good to have this person come in and talk about something. So think about those things as well. Go ahead, Jesse. Can't hear you, Jesse.
I'm sorry, I thought the intro would go longer. One of the things that I would love to see a second hour, and possibly multiple second hours on, is spectral frequency analysis. I just started getting into that and what it revealed about audio signal chains. It was gobsmacking. Suggestions for guests we could have on the second hour. I've worked with a fellow John Polito at Audio Mechanics in Burbank. He does audio restoration for old films and audio repair for new media. I think that could be a very, very interesting second hour.
That'd be huge. Love that. Mitchell?
I'd be interested in the physical aspects, how your ears work. How do you deal with getting older? How do you deal with having tinnitus? How do you work with the Fletcher-Munson curve? All of those things. I think that sort of starts at computer one, so maybe it would be a good baseline to have.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm interested in how 32-bit float, as it rolls out across the audio market, changes how mixers have to think about gain staging and things like that. But it's going to change things, and I just wondered how fast it's rolling out and what people think.
Good, Courtney.
I'd like to see troubleshooting be the topic, to troubleshoot audio problems, where they're coming from, how they're getting in, how to eliminate them, et cetera.
That's great. Sky?
And as we're doing these brainstorming sessions, what I'm recognizing is I love that I'm getting introduced to the concept, but if we could have an associative lab attached right behind it or right next to it in association with the expert, that is what I'm wanting to get my hands dirty, want to roll up my sleeves.
Yeah. So the general model that we're looking at for a lot of things, and you won't see it happen in the first quarter very much, but we're going to be slowly ramping this up, is there's like a 4-part piece that we're kind of thinking about right now. The first part is we might make a little video that we put on the YouTube channel, a short video that gives you an introduction to a concept that we're going to talk about in a second hour. So this is what's coming up. We won't necessarily do them for this persons coming in to talk. But if we're talking about, let's say, balanced audio, there might be a little 2 or 3 minute video on how balanced audio works, and say we'll answer more of your questions and so on and so forth in the second hour. Do the second hour, and then potentially a week or two later. And the reason we're not looking at doing it right after the show is that the vast majority, about 90% of our listeners are time shifting. So basically, they're watching this show later. So we don't want to necessarily do the lab right after the second hour. We want to do it the week after the second hour. And then the other thing that we're starting to think about is classes. So the second hour, there's a lab that might be an hour or two that we're all going to talk about something and work through something. But then we go, okay, now we're really going to sit down for the handful of people that are serious. They have that piece of hardware, they have the software, whatever. They'll chip in some money, and that person's really going to build a curriculum for a 10-week course or a 3-week course or even a 4-hour course on how to use that product. And that means that some of our members are, chipping in and helping to pay for other members to show them how to do stuff. So that's kind of the 4-part series there. After that, there's integrated training where we actually do events and have people work on them, but that's probably later in the year. So those are, it's going to take a little time for us to get that pattern going, like everything else we do. But I think that you're going to start seeing us try to experiment with that. You might only see one of those a month, and then one of those a week, and then a couple a week, over time. But to your point, I think that we want to follow up with labs on a select number of these. Not everything we do will do that, but a select number of them would be really useful that way. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico City, Mexico says, while office hours audio pipeline is being upgraded to 5.1, a second hour in mixing in surround 5.1, the Logic and Pro Tools approaches.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I think we should stop at 5.1 and go to full spatial audio, immersive audio. And also the big problem here as you deal with this expanding systems is getting monitoring. If you're trying to monitor in actual speaker systems, physically getting the speakers in your room and a monitor controller that can control 6, 8, 12 speakers and run that volume up and down is really difficult.
Yeah, and I think that we do, to this point, we absolutely, we're going to do 5.1. We're going to talk about Atmos. We're going to talk a lot about other things throughout the year. And one of the things that, and we're doing a lot, I do a lot of research in 5.1 and Atmos. so that's a lot of my time is spent thinking about those things and working out pipelines to do it remotely, to do it on site. One of the things that we want to do is think about how do we piece this out? This is for our council to think about. How do we piece it out? Because what do we want to talk about first? We probably want some overviews of how these things work. Then we want more vertical overviews. Then we want maybe to bring some people in to talk about it, maybe, and then we want to, so there's a lot of steps that we want to think about. How do we set up our speakers? A whole second hour on just setting up your speakers would probably be useful. So a lot of these things are breaking those out. There's probably enough to do something once a month for the year, to slowly get us up to speed on what that looks like, and then labs, and then other things like that. One of the big exciting things about doing 5.1 and why we're going to be doing it pretty soon is that we want to be able to do it every day so we get used to it. But what we're really getting good at is the ability to do a class. And so, classes in 5.1 where we can talk about 5. This is the first time we've ever had a class like that, where we can talk about 5.1 and actually have you hear it. So if you're in a 5.1 system, we can actually show you what that means. And eventually, if you're in an Atmos system, we can show you what that means, and so we can do, so over this year, we hope to be able to do both 5.1 and many other versions of this. And if you have a system that can hear it, we want to be able to deliver it to you. So imagine being able to pick up your iPhone, put it on your headphones, and when we have something circling around you, you can actually hear it circling around you in that process. And so that's going to change the way. I don't know of anybody else that's doing 5.1 or Atmos training online, even Dolby, that is in Atmos, in Atmos or 5.1. So that's what we're kind of really trying to figure out. Next question.
It comes from 1F Jeff Keithley, and I'm tempted to read it in sarcasm, but I'm going to read it straight. In the end, does audio even matter as much as some people think? Or do we just keep bringing up those audio guys along out of habit?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yes. And Jeff, if you are doing one of your broadcasts
I sense a little sarcasm there.
Yeah.
A little?
I hope.
Yeah. So, no, I just want to put this in practical terms here. So, Jeff, if you are doing one of your broadcasts and you lose audio, you have a silent movie. If you only lose video, you now have radio. Which would you prefer?
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I would like to see the opposite side of this coin, and how do we get more audio folks onto people who are broadcasting now? Because nothing will get me to tune out quicker than a laptop microphone 6 feet away from the speaker on their hour-long panel.
I won't even listen to a call in anymore. Like, I'm just done. Like, I won't play anymore. If you put a radio show on and you put someone on a phone, I'm done. Like, I'm just like, there's no reason for that anymore. We don't need to do that, and I won't listen to it. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, if it's a service that you're providing or being paid to do, I would at this time, technology is moving quickly, but I think you need something to specialize in that component of your experience that you're providing, the service you're providing. And audio is one of those things that's very unique. I mean, can the talent also put their makeup on? Yes, and sometimes they have to. But if you bring in a makeup person, that allows the talent to not worry about what they look like, and that's pretty critical. So audio, I would think, is a critical thing, and somebody should be thinking about it.
Good, Cordy.
And that's one thing we really haven't dealt with here is on-set respect, and it might be a good topic for a second hour, as to how audio has always been the unwanted stepson, the people that tend to ignore the audio mixer on the set and the social standing. It's everybody thinks about the camera and where the camera, everything's done for the visual aspects, and how the, audio gets no respect, you know what I mean?
Go ahead, Jeff.
It's like the saying, nobody likes a lawyer until they need one. Audio is one of those things. I mean, there's the extra credit stuff like spatial audio and Dolby Atmos, but that's great. But there's a baseline, and I don't know if anyone knows the physiological reason, but our brains are way more forgiving to problems with video, thankfully for me, than they are with audio. And even subconsciously, you will want to tune out or get out of that situation if it's bad, choppy, or really bad quality audio. Again, we're more forgiving with similar problems in video.
Yeah, 100%. I think that in most shows, I think sports is one exception that we don't need to hear as much of the audio there, because we don't really hear a lot of the nat sounds from sports. I mean, we hear some of it, and it's being added in there, but it's probably a little less at times. It definitely adds a lot to it, but it's not as important as the commentators are oftentimes. But outside of that, almost everything, I would say audio is probably 80% of the show. Go ahead, Marty.
Talk to someone who has hearing loss and ask them how important, their hearing audio is.
Next question.
Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach is up next. He says, a focus on voiceover. Bring in a few guests, cover the industry, new tech hardware and software, performance, issues around live sessions with video, and where it fits in the pre- and post-production of event production.
Go ahead, Jesse.
As much as voiceover, I think it would be very interesting to have voice actors on a program like this. So many of their interviews devolve into, can you have SpongeBob be at the Hindenburg crash or something like that? To get a more technical view into the world of voice acting would be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Mitchell?
Yeah, I'm with Jesse on that. I think acting is good. We did one once before. It was fascinating to have those experts come in. And I don't think we need to concentrate so much on the people that we already know that are on our panel that are voiceover talent. I think we need to find other people that have something to say about it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
We've actually done two. I did one early in probably the first 3 or 4 months of office hours. Then we had the bigger panel recently. Everybody seems to really enjoy them. So I think the more we do of that, people seem really interested in it.
Yeah, go ahead. Courtney?
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Of course, one thing we haven't focused on in voiceover maybe is ADR for movies and television, where they bring in, because there was a sound problem, they bring in the voice actors and have them reenact their lines on stage and how they have to match perspective, that kind of thing. Because it's a craft into itself.
Absolutely. Jeff?
And I'll request or suggest that when we do have some of those great guests, we skip the generic default question, which is, tell us how you got started. every interview they've done, they've given the how we got started. So I'd get to the kind of current day nitty gritty stuff that we want.
I think sometimes, though, it does give you context of like where they came from to do that. Because I think a lot of people, especially when they look at voiceover talent, the reason they're asking how did you get started is because they're trying to figure out how they can get started. So to see how it all started for them, Marty.
Yeah, that would be an interesting lab or class to bring in a voice acting coach to do something after
That'd be
hours.
great. Yeah, it'd be great to have a handful of people, go up and do their best. We all get the same thing to read and we all read it. I wouldn't do it during the second hour, but having something, maybe, a couple people that might be interested in doing the second hour, have a person go through 3 or 4 people reading the same thing and give them feedback. A lot of people would learn a lot from that. So it's a really good idea. Next question.
Next one comes from Jeff Keithley again. He's brave. Virtualizing audio mixers, Calrec, Telos, and LAWO.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic. And I was trying to think of a way we could show that. And one way is, first, you have to really understand signal flow in an analog console, and then you can look at a digital console. But the thing with digital consoles is when I get on a new one that I haven't worked with before, is just learning where they put things. What is their architecture?
I think that understanding, to your point, understanding the architecture of mixers is probably a second hour that wants to be done. I think we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but I think it'd be really good to talk about, what are DCAs and what are buses and what's gain and versus, the faders and all those things, post and pre-fader, EQ, all the other things, like tours of those things would be good. And I think that those also translate into labs, really nicely, whether it's an X32 or a QL1 or a Calrec, mixer. I think those things would be really fun labs that we could probably do as well. Jeff?
Yeah, in addition to that, the physical interface, so that we're not trying to mix with a mouse. How can we interface physical mixers, iPad controls, MIDI faders to get that all working with a virtual mixer, whether that's locally or across the internet.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. There are the basics of audio mixing and processing that are built into every mixer. That's a good foundation. You can work with any mixer if you understand the basics. But then every manufacturer takes a slightly different turn and puts a different flavor on interface, human interfaces, visual interfaces, and even feature sets like busing. There's mix busing, there's flex busing, there's spill busing, there's, all kinds of different twists that different manufacturers offer in the way of features. And it would be interesting to explore those differences.
Absolutely. Next question.
Ronnie Hofsey in Tromsø, Norway says, difference between live audio out in the room and mixing for live stream. What do you think of with good practical examples on skills and equipment?
Go ahead, Andy, again, for the second hour. Like what subjects would you want to cover?
Yeah, in fact, we've kind of just started this whole thing when we were looking at mix minus, for example. So the interesting way is how we would do this. But what comes to mind is that when you're mixing in a room, it starts with your PA system, because the PA system will greatly affect how it sounds on your stream and all of that. So it really has to start with that and tuning the room, because the room actually becomes your monitor system for everything else and headphones.
So as a second hour, I think that there's a couple of second hours there. There's obviously the PA system with an Omni mic, just so you can hear what's in there, which still isn't accurate. It's not your ears, but it could be something that you could hear. There is, how do you ring out the room? How do you tune the room? Those are all things that I think are little mysteries for a lot of people and a lot of audio engineers, do that. So those are some solid.
Yeah, the workflow in that is really important, and that we could teach that is, where do you start and how do you get there is really important, because those steps are critical.
Yeah, there's probably a second hour on just preparing a room for an event. Could be a second hour of just what are the steps that you're doing, everything from your pre-pro to your to when you load in, to what you're measuring, to what you're, getting ready to do. That'd be really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
The most common request that we get from the bands that we're working with is we want to play for our fans live and at the same time play for our fans internationally on a stream. And there's infinity questions that go along with that, and we're, sketching out ideas on like, can we build an isolation booth that will simulate the experience of the user internationally, but have it in the same room as the live band performing that's being mixed for the room that they're in, to do the mix in the ISO booth. It's just it unfolds into infinity immediately.
Yep. Yeah. And whether we should have, anyway, it's a long story. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach. He says, a focus on audio plugins, EQ, noise reduction, de-essers, limiters, and so forth. Recommendations, live versus post-production issues, compare and contrast, bundles versus a la carte, perhaps some pre-produced demos and blind A/B test examples, maybe live voting.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think this needs to begin with the basic understanding of a particular class, equalizers or dynamics processors. And do you continue in that same second hour when you're working on you've figured out what a compressor is and explained it, then do you then go into why I choose this particular compressor? What is the difference between these popular compressors? What are the applications of it? Or do we kind of explain all the processors in 1 second hour and then wait for another few weeks and then go into why we choose? So it kind of need a direction as to how we want to head down that. Again, whether it's sort of all basic or focused on one particular effects processor.
Right, Mitchell?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's so much there. That's a very deep subject that you'd have to split it up, maybe by company. For example, Waves, they could fill a whole second hour very easily. I know Gilad Karen over at Wave, the CEO and the co-founder. I could probably send a note out to him if we want to.
Good, Courtney?
Yeah, one good second hour would be on all these plugins in order of insertion, because it's an audio chain and it makes a difference what comes before what in the chain and how it sounds different if the de-esser is put in front of the noise reduction, or the noise reduction is put at the end, or the limiter, etc. And so basically outlining the different plugins and where they're best inserted into the chain.
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit, doing a basic second hour on voice processing, for podcasts or for shows like this, and just what do most people dig into and do there. Jeff?
Yeah, I know for me, this was one of the challenging things to learn going into voiceover, and probably cursed by having a very deep technical background. Other voice actors who don't care at all about the tech. They want someone to just set it up for them, and then they will never touch it. They don't care. It's went from okay to good or great. Having a technical background, we obsess over all the differences and the switches and knobs, and there's always something newer and better, and is that one going to be better or make my workflow faster? So that's there's just a ton there.
Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, this is a really deep topic. That could be an entire semester of classes. To do a second hour would be highly targeted and a really good idea. You just have to choose the topic, because application is, really important and can change how you do things and why you do things, whether it be for voiceover, for conference, for live, for streaming, for in-room. It all changes things.
And I think, again, that the real opportunity here is to do potentially a second hour that covers some of it, and then look at labs, and then even look at some of the folks here doing a class, like we're going to do this for the next 6 weeks or 10 weeks. And everyone's, again, going to chip some money in so that person can really dedicate time to it and make that happen. And so we'll see how that looks in the future. Jesse?
The importance of audio chains was mentioned. This could be a blind spot. If there's any audio editing software that works as a nonlinear node system instead of that traditional ladder of effects, that would be very, very interesting to see what's being done in that area.
I've only seen a handful. I'm a big proponent of that. I think that we should get rid of all of the, I as a nodal compositor, I look at audio mixing as audio compositing, and I really just want a nodal interface. And the only nodal interfaces that I've really seen are things like the 806, the BSS 806, and it's just very limited in what it can do. But those types of solutions, I think, there's potentially a huge future in those, and I don't think if people know of a mixer that does that, let me know, because every time I go to IBC or NAB, that's the number one thing I'm looking for. It's a nodal mixer. So
not a mixer, but in a DAW, Studio One has a type of system like that.
I don't want I don't want a DAW. I want just a nodal mixer. I got inputs, I got outputs, and then I just add the nodes to what I'm doing. And that's all, just a big processor. And then I can add interfaces and so on to it and say this interface controls this attribute. And it can be that interface can control any attribute. So you could build it up as a standard mixer with a standard thing. But I haven't seen anybody do that. So if someone sees that, we'll put them on.
I've tried to do that with Symmetrics processors, which is an open.
Yeah. I've owned a bunch of this.
Yeah, and you can program them and do custom interfaces and do just about anything. But the problem I ran into was designing an interface that included all of the traditional processing, EQs, compressors on every channel. Yeah. It adds up really quickly and uses up a lot of processing resources. Yeah.
So if people know of anybody that's really going down that path, let us know. I mean, this again, Symmetrics does it to some degree, and as does the BSS 806, but they're not really solving the full problem. It'd be really interesting to see what happens. And now a lot of the processes are really powerful, so it'd be really interesting. Next question.
Next question comes from Nigel DeSalle in Austin, Texas. Dante and X32, how to get the best from the combination?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question and an interesting topic. You have to think about Dante, teach Dante, and how it works. And then you can apply it to almost any mixer. And I could see this very easily being, the intro to this would be, we show Dante as a matrix and how to leverage it for your system. And then we go into each individual mixer. Maybe that's in the lab or something. So we can look at Behringer, we can look at Allen and Heath, we can look at a Yamaha. And maybe that's a good way to approach this subject.
Go ahead, Jeff.
A lot of the part of the confusion that comes in here is you have a routing matrix in Dante and you have a very powerful and confusing routing matrix in the X32, but that is available in software. So that's an easy thing to screen share. So as we go into the second hour explaining this, it's these particular tools are great things for sharing. And then, obviously we need a camera on top of an X32 physical interface as an additional input.
It's funny. I realized I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, and then we'll show the interface. And I was like, I have a lot of X32s. I just don't have any with any sliders. they're all, I buy all racks. And so it's a really interesting puzzle there. But I do think that, to your point, the two that come before this is another session on Dante and a session specifically on the X32 and how it works and what the different attributes are. And then you get into this one. Next question.
Jeff Keithley's back. And this time he says, invite Alex from Protostream back for an update on mixing audio remotely.
Yeah, 100%. We should definitely bring him back. It'd be great. Next question.
Matt Cool in Montreal, Quebec, Canada says, I'd love to see a discussion around recording a live band with miking technique, monitoring the DAW setup, studio etiquette, and so forth.
Yeah, go Jesse.
I think miking instruments and vocals could be a once a month lab topic from now till the end of time. There's just so much to cover, and that information is so valuable.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, this is hard to fit into 1 hour and getting all of the people there ahead of time. So getting a band and then, like Jesse said, this is many hours because just setting up the mics on a drum set can take a fair amount of time. So is that set up ahead of time before we land in the second hour and we're just showing through that? That's some of the things we need to hash out.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, every single instrument could take more than an hour to explore. It's fascinating. Between the first two would be drums and grand piano.
Yeah, that would take you the whole time. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, an additional topic would be IEMs versus monitor wedges and how they affect your recording.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that a whole thing on, we kind of got into this thing with Mix Minus where we started talking about stage mixes. And I think that stage mixes really just want to be their own, the in-ear monitor mix versus wedges is its own second hour that's there as opposed to trying to fit it into a Mix Minus discussion. So I think that getting into those and talking about the different devices and so on and so forth would be great. I am trying to find some space. I have some opportunities both in the building that I have here we're going to do some small mixes. And I think that there'll be a chance to do some labs in that area and then figure out what percolates into a second hour as well. we've wired the pit, the infamous pit. If you watched Light and Magic, it's right below our server room. It turns out we didn't realize that it was so close. We thought, oh, it was somewhere in the building. Then we realized it's right above it. It's right below us, and it's a floated room, and it's not very big. But the guitarist for a band in the '90s called, it's still a current band, Stroke 9, is in that room. So we've talked to John about, we've been using it for Michael Krasny's show, and now we have Dante and control networks that are already in that room, and we just pulled fiber into the room. So we've got 12 strands of fiber that are in the room now, so we can put together cameras and all kinds of other things. So we're very close to starting to do tests, and I think that this will help us, when we start miking things and putting things together. What we may do, because we really own this, not own it, but we own the space when we were using it, put up cameras and let you watch, Jeremy or other people miking everything and working through it and listening to comms as people are talking about it and so on and so forth as we get ready for a 5.1 show. We're going to also be experimenting with sending that to LA to have it mixed in a theater, and then out, so that we, so we'll be, there'll be a lot in that area that we're going to be working on. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington's up next, teaching the next generation and learning from them why we do what we do.
Go ahead, Sky.
What comes to mind is the need in the houses of worship. And again, the challenges has been discussed, the in-house versus the extra live feed out and onto the internet. Also, I'm thinking of Dave Paskin has a lot of experience at this. And then Marty, I think you also have been doing a lot of seeing this. I'd be curious, where do you see the younger minds coming into this need? And then also John on the Saturday for the education. But what does the next generation expect? What do they think they want? What is their audio needs both now and a year from now?
Go, Jeff.
And so much of what teaching is hard for experts is that we don't think about why we do something because it is so ingrained and instinctual after so much experience. It's like, why did you grab that mid EQ knob and make a 3 dB boost? It's running through that, and that's what's great about these labs, is breaking things back down to basics. And here's what the functions do, but also, why did we do that?
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. Focus on becoming a better production audio engineer versus a live sound engineer.
Good, Courtney.
Well, they are two completely different jobs, and there's very little overlap between the two, other than the fact that you're both dealing with sound. Microphones are different. The goal of what you're trying to record is different, etc. So comparing the two might be good. You could do 1 hour on the production audio engineering and then 1 hour on live sound engineering, and maybe a half hour on how they don't overlap.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and I think maybe part of this discussion could also just be gathering a bunch of us audio guys here as a roundtable and talk about how we got from one discipline to another. In my case, I started in theater and also live music. And then I had a mentor who did broadcast sound. So, hearing those stories, I think, from other audio guys and gals would be really helpful maybe to drive this discussion.
Good morning.
Yeah, to both of those points, live sound for music, live sound for theater, recording engineering. I think that production engineering, for broadcast, is more related to recording than to live sound, and it's a completely different goal. It's a completely different, similar process. We're using a lot of the same tools, although not necessarily. Sometimes we're using a different kind of mixer that's purpose-built for an application. So yeah, that's a really great topic.
Next question.
Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach up next with The Modern DJ, perhaps a panel of high-tech DJs that do live shows and or clubs, the modern setup, hardware, software using physical control vinyl on turntables versus DJ mixing boards, and live demos.
Go, Jeff.
Yeah, I don't know how much overlap there is in terms of real world application to the folks on the panel or listening, but as someone who a million years ago DJ'd live events with records and a mixer, a basic mixer, what's going on now is just, and especially the tech behind it, is just fascinating. And there are, of course, lots of quote unquote DJs now that just basically have a playlist and they're knob twisters, they're twisting, EQ knobs basically. But you have folks that are using these real vinyl, but they're not records. They're just control signal to the software like Serato, and those records or vinyl, I should call it, are controlling what the computer is doing, and it's just fascinating. Scratch Bastid is one that's just amazing, does amazing live events, and I think it'd be an interesting discussion at least.
Yeah, I think that really, years ago, I first started as a rave jock and then was moved to weddings because weddings make more money, made more money at the time. I think that the when I look at the technology now, now that you can extract, I think Serato and a couple of the other ones will extract the vocals right out of the drums right out of a track that's sitting on your drive, and so that you can do all the things that we used to do where we wanted to do submixes and do all kinds of extra samples, and now that can all be done. And I think looking at what the state of the art of that is, it would be really interesting. Absolutely. Next question.
Bob Sturdivant in San Antonio says, possible discussion of human versus computer versus AI voiceovers, and if or when AI might replace the human. Is it a career someone should pursue, or other ways they might use AI?
Go ahead, Courtney.
This is a rapidly shifting environment here in AI, and that would be a good topic for how AI is used in, for example, in voiceover, or rather ADR for voice replacement. If you don't have an actor to do the ADR to replace lines that were damaged, etc., and using a deepfake voice of that actor, trained on that actor to replace the voice. So how it's used in production, AI is used in production, and how to incorporate it into the production pipeline would be interesting.
You got Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Courtney. I think that makes sense. Trying to play off of the sensationalism of it's going to replace a lot of voiceover people doesn't really serve anybody. I think it's more of how does it supplement and how does it make it better?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'll just add two things that it, first of all, has already replaced, folks for certain applications. Again, I think it was fascinating to hear Alex's candid perspective that for certain things, it's preferable for him to listen to things with a computer-generated voice because it's more consistent. So, I'll let Alex talk, but he can go through it quicker than trying to track a human voice. And again, it will continuously replace more and more folks for the right applications, and but also there will still be room, hopefully, for the human role also.
Yeah, I think that definitely figuring out where those things make sense. Where does it make sense to have a computer do this work? Where does it make sense to have a human? Because it's not either or in any way, shape, or form. There's definitely lots of places where you want a human being to do it, and there's lots of places that you might want a computer to do it. So I think it'll be really interesting to see. That's going to be a big discussion for us overall for all of this year and next. Next question.
Tom Ferguson, Phoenix, Arizona. I'd love an in-depth second hours about Dante products and integration, starter kit to extended use. If you make an investment, what are the possibilities?
Good, Tom.
You need to start at the novice level. I need the novice level, and then move from there, because this could be a multi-show thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that this is also where it lends itself towards a lab to kind of play with things and show people things and have people grab onto stuff. And I don't even know if we need to do the classes here because Audinate does so many good ones that we might be able to. But what we could do that I think would be really interesting is for the companies that are doing these classes. One of the things I was just thinking about while I was reading your question was we could gang up on the trainings and all do them together, so that we could all then have a discussion afterwards and after hours. So all go to the Audinate and then maybe even see if Audinate will come afterwards to our little like, hey, we've got 20 people that went to your class. Will you come and
like a
talk
flash
to us a little
mob?
bit? Like a flash mob. We've been talking about quality bombing. We were talking about the fact that we could just suddenly show up with all the great cameras and everything else and ask lots of questions. But we could do it as a group. I think that could make it more fun than us just individually doing it. And there's a lot of different sessions that we could do, from Blackmagic to Audinate to others. There you go, Jeff.
Sounds like Tom is volunteering himself as a guinea pig for a lab and his gear, that we could work through his system and train him in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Bob Sturdivant in San Antonio. Up next, discussion: audio on a shoestring budget and limitations, and the next steps up in equipment and or software as you build your studio.
Yeah, go, Jeff.
This is near and dear to my heart. Working at a university for several decades, we have a shoestring budget, if that. So I'm used to doing audio on shoestring budgets. I'd love to talk about this.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I see this all the time in my work with churches, houses of worship, or many of them, small to medium-sized houses of worship, are working on shoestring budgets or less. That would be something really worthwhile exploring, because there are, 20 ways to skin a cat, and how you do it can make a real difference in what the results are.
Yeah, I think on the other side of that, I think we kind of skipped over it, but I think just covering audio for a house of worship or video for a house of worship in general would be really interesting, because there's a lot of them that are not working on a shoestring budget. And so there can be a lot of audio that's been added into it, and seeing how they're approaching that and what the challenges are specifically to that could be really interesting across many faiths, just looking at the technical end of what that looks like. And I know that you've spent, Marty, a lot of time talking to people about that. So it'd be fun to do that. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and again, I'm happy to be following Marty, because he has trained the real solution, and that's the human. That's the wetware. And consequently, I did have that exact same thing. I got to introduce a member of my Sunday morning group to the term dog fooding, because he had to stay home, and he watched online, and he all of a sudden came up to you on Monday email. He says, how can we make the quality better? How much money does it cost? Yeah. And I thought, it's the human. And then we talk about money. So there's that. It's not a silver bullet. It's silver buckshot. And it really is the human training. So that's a part of my input into that desperate need. Also, a tiered system. I know Roscoe originally came out with a tiered system if you wanted to come online. What was a step one, this budget? Step two, this budget.
It could be something that a second hour, to your point there, could be also just us building the tiers for different things. So it could be like a tiering cameras, tiering mics, tiering mixers, tiering, so we all just kind of talk about what we think is the entry level. We all talk about what we think is middle of the road, and we all talk about what we think is the high end of that. And that could be and you could just do that, once a quarter or something.
Well, and the engineer that helped us initially he gave me the great phrase, here's the right now solution, and here's the right solution.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I think because there's been such an increase in high quality equipment that's available for a much cheaper price. The democratization of high end audio gear has happened, and how to cope with putting together a budget audio system, and how to cope with the stigma of using something that seems to be low budget in a professional audio situation. I remember I used to have to cover up the realistic logos on my little playback speakers. Everyone thought, boy, those sound great, but I would never tell them they came from Radio Shack. So there's a lot of stigma involved with using budget gear in a professional situation.
Oh yeah, that's probably a whole second hour is just the gear that you use for show, and why you do it. That'd be probably an interesting second hour on its own. Go ahead, Jeff.
I'll volunteer / request. Our own Josh Kaufman could probably do a whole second hour, not necessarily the gear, but on DIY solutions for everything else. And he's done some amazing things that he's kind of trickled out and showed us in terms of light panels and rigging and everything else, with these DIY solutions that he's come up with. But the end result is beyond professional. And he could do that for audio, let alone all the other topics.
Absolutely. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Sky Gleason here on the panel, Seattle, Washington. Adobe Premiere now has an AI tool in their workflow to clean the audio. What second hour can we have to discuss AI in audio? I'd love to learn what the AI's best practices are, needs, and values.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, we've already talked about plugins and so how deep a subject that is, but I think this is a good point because it's a practical application of plugins in general, and I think this is a manageable second hour subject.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Well, and I also want to learn what other tools are doing it other than Premiere. I was just introduced to it yesterday, and we do have in our film some needs to clean it up. Well, I thought we were going to have to do it all in audio post, but now on my non-budget that I can, through Premiere, which is our platform, send it up to their AI, clean it, and bring it back down. I'm sure that Resolve's doing similar things, and there are other tools that I would have originally wanted an audio engineer to do, but now I can let them do the design work and do some other things for the creative process that maybe I don't have to, spend that budget on Marty to get the clean audio.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, and maybe it could be hosted by a Chat GPT bot with a Mid-Journey avatar.
Mid-Journey could be drawing the diagrams that are generated by the Chat GPT, and then yeah, exactly.
Nobody will replace you, Courtney.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Matthias Utia in Helsinki, Finland again. Setting up EQ for a person's mic and steps to improve live stream bus, including effects, limiter, and so forth.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, this question brought to mind something I don't think we've touched on a lot here, which is ear training. And I think we need like a class, maybe we call it ear training for lighting technicians, or video people too. So I think that's important because we need to talk about the technical craft and aesthetic connection and how we use all of that to achieve good audio.
Yeah, I think one of the things that'd be really interesting is to take someone's voice, take a couple different voices, open it up in an EQ, and then just move things around so people can hear what we're talking about and where do we want to pull it up and where do we want to pull it down and I think we can actually do that pretty usefully in Zoom, and we could figure this out, how it goes out to the stream, because if we do the share inside of Zoom, in the share audio in the advanced tab, we're getting a pretty clean signal. I mean, there's no reason why we can't be outputting that fairly effectively. And then we just need to send that signal to the stream as well. And I think we could do something where you can really hear it. It's not, clamped down, and we could really talk about a lot of details. I think that'd be super useful. And I think that's, again, I think that there's a whole hour on equalization. There's a whole hour on compression. There's a whole hour on, those are like people really understanding how they work and when to use them and how to use them are whole hours. Go ahead, Sky.
The audio sommelier and that's where I thought this component in all of these different concepts of what's a good thing and what's a bad thing and the origin of it. So that I love that idea.
Yeah. Good, Bill.
It caused me to think about mic positioning. I think that by itself might be interesting for a second hour. I always notice I've been in voice booths for such a long time, and every time I reset up a voice booth and hang my mic, I have to pay attention to where in the physical space of the voice booth it is because of standing waves and issues. Am I, standing in front of the glass, or am I into a corner? And those will affect what the recorder actually records. So positioning mics in space might be a worthwhile topic.
Yep, Marty?
Yeah, and you can't talk about EQing mics without talking about room acoustics.
And we've talked about those in the past. We've had second hours on those, but I think that it never hurts to come back to them. So there might be, maybe there's something that's once a month that's just the basics. We're going to go through one of these basics. There's probably 12 of those we could think of pretty quickly that we're always going to cover once a month, that we're going to just make sure that we're working through those. To make sure that we have that by the end of the year, or within 2 years. We've covered all of those things. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael. Synthesis methods, subtractive, FM, wavetable, and so forth.
And go ahead, Courtney.
We have done a couple of after hours on this. Carl did a great one on synthesis with demonstrations of analog synth. It could be a very deep subject, and it tends to be a little bit tedious and hard to hear the differences between the two. It's subjective to a great deal. So maybe better as an after hours topic or seminar would be better there.
Yeah, I think talking about synths more would be great. I've got a couple of guests that I want to try to bring on that do a lot of both modular as well as other synthesizers. And I think it'd be fun to have more of those. We've had a couple great ones with Carl and with Nick. So hopefully we'll be able to do more of those as well. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana says, best learning resources, when to use mentors versus YouTube versus formal training, and what is a great learning environment for audio?
Go, Jesse.
In addition to that, I think a second hour on finding mentors would be a really valuable second hour in audio and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Stefan Fisher back in Würzburg says, how to start working with better and or bigger mixers, maybe an X32. What are the first steps and how to approach that kind of machine?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, this starts from the fundamentals of how a mixer works and how signal flow works. And once you can grok that, then you can step up to any mixer and just determine what are the controls that I'm looking for. And so they each have their idiosyncrasies, but mixers are mixers are mixers. Whether they're virtual or analog or digital, they're just a mixer.
Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York says, solutions for watching movies in 2.0 stereo when so many films have blasting music and buried dialogue. Any solutions for people who don't have a center channel to adjust?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I think this touches on how you do stereo, and a good stereo mix starts with a good mono mix, actually, and a good 5.1 mix starts with a good stereo mix, and so forth and so on until you get to Atmos. And so maybe there's a lab and or discussion there too.
You good, Courtney?
Yeah, this has become a problem, so much so that soundbar manufacturers and television manufacturers are now building in special filters to accentuate the dialogue because people have a hard time hearing the dialogue amongst the 5.1 and the surround mixes and the stereo mixes if they're improperly tuned or improperly decoded. So, yeah, it might be an interesting thing to point out solutions that to this problem for those that have problems with hearing the dialogue because many directors suppress it.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I know that my family leaves the captioning on all the time. You know, like it's just, and then it makes it hard to get people to want to go to movies because they can't understand what's going on. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. Next question.
Matthias Hutila is back with from Helsinki, Finland, with headset mic reviews, comparisons, cheap, budget, expensive.
Yeah, I think this gets back into that whole looking at different ranges for different products. Whether it's microphones or headsets or speakers or whatever, and thinking and talking about what we would put into those piles. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Tom Ferguson has a tech tackle that we've been working on to give you the good, better, best scenario. It might be a good time to bring that in.
Yeah. Next question.
Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona comes back this time with how about kits and issues involved in sounding good and looking good from a hotel room?
Go ahead, Jesse.
I think it would also be interesting to see the panelists, to see everybody be given the same size Pelican case and what you would put in it for looking and sounding great on any remote job.
Yeah. Now that's a challenge.
There you go. Next question.
Brooke Hafner says for Zoom meeting. Brody. I'm sorry. That was clicking over right as I was trying to read it. Anyway, Brody asked for Zoom meeting managers, a second hour or series on improving Zoom audio, problem prevention, ear training and troubleshooting, sound check strategies, Zoom audio setting suggestions, and checklist mute options and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really what we do to triage a remote panelist would probably be useful. I mean, when we're bringing someone in for a show, I think that we've talked about it in the past, but I think that just for audio, just really how we try to solve that, I think would be pretty useful, both for when you're in a situation, but also for bringing in a remote that may not know as many things that need to be done. Next question.
Marty Adias here on the panel from Maryland says, show automation for audio and how it can be interfaced to graphics, video, and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great advanced topic. Like that we talk about it. We've, done things like tie the switcher, like for a surround sound mix where you're jumping from one 360 camera to another. You have to change the mix for every one of those. And so we figured out how to tie the switcher into the scenes inside of the QL so that when you're changing cameras, it literally changed the position of everything as it relates to that. and things that tie those things together would be really interesting. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I know on the other end of it, like just using QLab in production, things like that, just tools like that, and when to use it and when not to use it too, because I've seen stuff overused, and I'm like, oh, okay, you're going to push that one button to do 100 things. What happens if it breaks, or you need to do something different in the moment?
Absolutely, Marty.
Yeah, in my Monday audio meeting, we started talking about for smaller houses of worship who don't have trained volunteers, they want to be able to utilize something like a Stream Deck to trigger a series of steps that does a whole bunch of things, from changing PTZ camera position presets to muting and unmuting microphones to maybe even changing lighting and graphics and lower thirds and stuff like that. And it's, it's possible. It's very possible to do, and figuring out the best way to do it that is the most foolproof and easy for people to understand is the challenge.
No, absolutely. Next question.
Jesse Mills, San Francisco Bay Area. Are there methods to send a phone's mic audio to another phone wirelessly so the receiving phone cam is transmitting that remote phone's mic audio in an RTMP or SRT app? Thinking about a next-gen use case here.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I think Jesse and Brody should get together about that challenge of doing something remotely and getting, because this is becoming the tool of a lot more people are using. So to workshop this into a solution would be great.
Go ahead, Jesse.
This just made my brain jump to another track, which is a monthly update notes or newly released features on your phone, on common hardware that we're all sharing or that people are using a lot, just to do an hour focused on what's new in the software and hardware that month.
I also think that we can go the other direction. I'm just looking at this one where we do labs, that we're going to lab something out and they percolate into a second hour. Like, hey, we did a lab and we played with these ideas and we came up with this solution to make that actually happen. So I think we could go the other direction for some of those as well. So it's just figuring out how to tie all those together. Wow, that was a lot. We now have enough ammo for a couple years. so we'll still stop every quarter to see how we're doing and talk about what's working and not working. But I think that we've got a lot of great ideas and how to structure kind of what I'm really looking for is how do we structure a series of things, over the year. So, if we're going to do once a month, maybe we're going to talk about the basics. And so what are 12 things that do that? And we're going to have 12 different people come in and we're going to have 12 different, vendors come in. Now we're almost done. Like we got, we're closing in on filling up all of those spaces pretty quickly. And so that's what we're going to try to, kind of keep on doing. But these brainstorming sessions are just key, for us to figure this out and get the responses from everybody here really helps the whole process. Tomorrow, of course, we'll be talking about video. So Bill will be hosting there and we'll be doing exactly what we did on the first 3 days, on the fourth day, and talk about video. Of course, Friday, we're going to talk about logistics, all the logistics related to production. And Saturday, we're going to talk about education. So what do we want to do in all of these areas? And these are, especially at the beginning of the year, but even throughout the year, these are really important conversations. So hopefully if you're enjoying this one, as we think through those things, you'll jump in and give us your 2 cents over the next couple days as we try to figure all of these things out. Thanks to the producers for all the great ideas and great questions and great thoughts there. Okay, it's just really, really great to have all of you here. There's a lot of people here today, and putting in a lot of both questions in the first hour, which is fantastic, as well as great suggestions in the second hour. Thanks to the panelists. Of course, we can't do this without you, and it's really great to see such a big audio team. I mean, our real goal with each one of these days is that the second hour is important. But what we really want to make sure of is that second hour is important, but that first hour means that you can come in and ask an audio question on Wednesday, and there's people here that really know really know the answers that can give those back to you. And I think that is something we're trying to do for each of these days is really have these kind of verticals where there's the right people for that session are there. So we really appreciate all the all the audio experts that came and joined us today. And then thank you, of course, to the great team in the back end, making all of this happen. It's constantly evolving, constantly getting better, constantly breaking. And there's a great team both in the engineering side as well as the live activation side that just keeps making this happen every single day, 7 days a week. It's just really amazing work. So thank you so much. A quick reminder that the Reader Workshop is at 3 p.m. Pacific time today. 105,000 miles. We got a 1K. We got 1K today. And 169,000 kilometers, and most importantly, 951 million bananas for scale. We think that equates to approximately 300 million minions head to tail. Just in case you're wondering for a minion scale. So we think that somewhere in that ballpark. But we'll do some more research on that. And now let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. Do some mid-journey of minions, that different ones every single time, and maybe even graphics for bananas. Can do mid-journey bananas. I don't even know what that would be, but it'd be like Darth Vader as a banana.
Minions. John Bretto has a column for how many minions does it take to create.
The question is, do they have two eyes or one eye? I think the efficiency is very different between the two.
Stereo versus mono.
Exactly. There's certain things that the stereo minions can do that the single-eyed minions can't do. The mono minions. That's what we like to call them, mono minions, stereo minions. And I wonder if there's a lot of classes in there between mono and stereo.
Is Minions a second hour?
Yeah, I think there's a second hour.
There's a second hour.
Audio for minions. I think
Video for
great
minions.
Yeah,
Is it going to be Minion Fact or Minion Opinion?
I think it's going to be Minion Fact.
Nice.
I think that we should bring them on for the second hour and just have